Your comfort zone is the most expensive room you'll ever rent, and you've been paying the rent with your life. It feels like shelter, but it's actually a slow surrender disguised as peace. You've built it carefully. The routines, the familiar people, the predictable disappointments you can survive. By the end of this, you'll see exactly why the place that feels safest is the one quietly costing you everything. Notice something about the room you're in right now. The walls didn't appear by accident. Every choice you've refused to make, every conversation you've avoided, every door you walked past pretending it was locked, each one laid a brick, and the strange part, you don't remember building it. The mind has a quiet talent for renaming things. It calls retreat, wisdom. It calls hesitation, discernment. It calls a cage home. So before you can leave the room, you have to admit you furnished it yourself. Here's where most teachings stop. They tell you to push through fear, to take massive action, to leap, and then you try, and within a week you're back where you started, blaming your willpower. The reason is that you treated the cage as the problem, when the cage is only the symptom. The cage is built by an assumption, a quiet daily assumption about who you are and what life is willing to give you. Move the body without moving the assumption, and the body comes home to the same room. So what is the assumption you've been feeding? It usually sounds reasonable. I'm just being realistic. I have responsibilities. Now isn't the right time. Listen closer. Underneath those sentences, there's a quieter one. It says, this much is what I'm allowed. This much and no more. That sentence is the architect. Until you find it and revise it, every move you make outward will be quietly pulled back inward by the gravity of who you believe yourself to be. Neville Goddard said it plainly. Your assumptions about yourself harden into the world around you. As mechanism. The room you're in is the visible shape of an invisible belief, which means the comfort zone is familiar. And familiarity is the most dangerous drug the human mind has ever metabolized, because it convinces you that survival is the same thing as living. Watch what happens in a familiar room. Your nervous system relaxes. Your attention dulls. The version of you that shows up there is the version you've practiced for years. Competent, predictable, slightly bored. You think you're resting, but something else is happening underneath. Every day you spend in that room, you cast a vote for the person you already were yesterday. Stack enough of those votes, and the future shows up wearing your past's face. This is the part nobody warns you about. The comfort zone is where decay begins. Cells that aren't challenged atrophy. Muscles that aren't loaded shrink. Skills that aren't used erode. And the self follows the same law. A consciousness that isn't stretched contracts to fit the smallest container. It's allowed to occupy. You think you're standing still. You're actually shrinking, in slow motion at a speed too gradual to notice in the mirror. You feel it anyway. You feel it in the restless pull at 2 a.m. when sleep won't come. You feel it in the quiet ache when someone else announces the thing you were going to do. You feel it in the small private grief of catching your own reflection and meeting a stranger. That ache has a name. It's the part of you that knows you were built for something the current room can't hold. So here's the harder truth. Discomfort is the path. The Hermetic teachers called it the principle of polarity. That growth and contraction are two ends of the same line, and you cannot move toward one without leaving the other. When your assumption begins to expand, your environment, which was tuned to the old one, will resist. That resistance feels like anxiety. It feels like doubt. It feels like the universe telling you to turn back. It's the old structure groaning under the weight of a new self. And this is where the spiritual path gets honest. The teachers who promised that manifestation would feel like floating downstream. We're skipping the middle chapter. The middle chapter is friction. The middle chapter is the day your old life argues with you in the voice of people you love. The middle chapter is the moment you must choose, again, the inner image of who you're becoming, even though every external signal insists you're being unrealistic. That choice, quiet, repeated, undramatic, is the actual work. A skeptical part of you is forming a fair objection right now. It says, I've left my comfort zone before. I took the leap and life punished me for it, so I try again. That experience was real, and the pain it left was real. But notice what actually happened. You moved your body across the room without first revising the assumption that built the room. The walls reassembled around the new location. The job changed. The relationship changed. The room came with you because the room was made of belief. This is why so many people change everything and feel nothing change. They redecorate the cage, they paint it a different color, install a window, hang new art. And then they wonder why the air still feels stale. The cage is upstream of the decor. Until you walk upstream, into the assumption itself, you'll keep redesigning the same prison and calling it growth. What does walking upstream actually look like? It looks smaller than you'd expect. It begins with what Neville called the mental diet, the daily refusal to feed thoughts that don't match the self you're becoming. Substitution, not suppression. When the old thought arrives, and it will, dressed in its familiar costume, you don't argue with it. You simply don't follow it down the corridor. You return to the inner image, the version of you who already lives in the larger room. You return there 100 times a day if you have to. Each return is a vote. Each vote moves the architecture. This is where discipline meets devotion. Most people imagine discipline as gritted teeth and force. Real discipline is gentle, almost monastic. It's the quiet refusal to keep replaying the inner movie that built the cage. It's choosing, at the level of imagination, in the privacy of your own mind, to inhabit the end, to feel it, to talk from inside it, to make decisions as if the room you actually want is the room you already live in. Do this long enough, and the outer world has no choice but to rearrange itself to match. The law only mirrors. A friend of mine, and you've met a version of her in your own life, spent 8 years almost starting, almost moving, almost leaving. She was loyal to an assumption she didn't know she was holding, that wanting more was somehow ungrateful. The day she revised that assumption, nothing visible changed. Her bank account looked the same, her apartment looked the same. But the inner room shifted. Within a year, the outer one did too. The gravity changed direction. You felt that gravity, you feel it now. The pull back toward the chair you usually sit in, the familiar scroll, the conversation you could have in your sleep. These things become dangerous only when they become the entire diet. When you start mistaking the size of your habits for the size of your life. Consider what the room actually costs you. Not in money, in identity. Every time you say, "That's just not me," to something that pulled at your attention, you sign a small contract with a smaller version of yourself. Every time you defer the question, you teach your subconscious that questions like that aren't yours to ask. The cost compounds quietly, the way interest compounds in a savings account you never check. You only notice the balance years later, when you reach for a future that should have been waiting and find someone else already living in it. There is a teaching in the Kabbalion about mental transmutation, the idea that any state can be changed by deliberately raising the vibration of the one beneath it. Strip the language of its mysticism, and what remains is practical. You don't escape a state by denying it. You escape it by occupying a higher one, with so much attention and feeling that the lower one runs out of fuel. That is what living in the end actually means. Not pretending the room is bigger than it is. Inhabiting the larger room so fully that the small one stops being plausible. So here is the uncomfortable truth the comfort zone doesn't want you to hear. Safety, as you've been defining it, is the slowest form of self-betrayal available. It feels like protection. It functions like erasure. Every day you spend defending the smaller version of yourself is a day the larger version waits a little further down the road, wondering when you'll arrive. The good news is hidden inside that same truth. If the room was built by assumption, it can be unbuilt the same way. You need a different inner sentence. You need to catch the architect mid-build and hand him a new blueprint. Tonight, when the room goes quiet and the day stops asking things of you, try this. Close your eyes. Find the version of you who already lives in the life you keep almost reaching for. Notice what they're wearing. Notice how they breathe. Notice the small, ordinary gestures, pouring coffee, locking a door, laughing at something private. Stay there until it feels less like fantasy and more like memory, then open your eyes and go to sleep inside that feeling. That's construction. Do that nightly. Do it as devotion, not as experiment. And during the day, when the old room tries to call you back, and it will, often in the voice of every fear you've ever rehearsed, you simply remember where you actually live now. The cage has a door. You built the cage, which means you already know the combination. You always did. Stop calling the small room safety. Start calling it what it is. The place you outgrew years ago and kept renting out of habit. The lease is up. It's been up for a while. The keys to the next room are in your hand, in the quiet sentence you choose to repeat tomorrow morning, before the world starts speaking over you. Choose carefully. The walls are listening.